Good evening over there, over here, in the back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am not Ann Bookman, but I'm trying to be every day. First of all, we're going to start by giving Ann a round of applause for all of her work. And neither am I Chancellor Sherry Penny, who also is in the room tonight. Sherry has built a tremendous legacy here. I am Keith Motley, and I'm honored to be the chancellor here at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Yeah, you can give that a round of applause. Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm so glad that you joined us this evening for this special event. I was just walking over here. In fact, I wasn't even walking from my office here. I was sort of floating, and the students they were wondering what's going on with the chancellor. Why is he so excited tonight? I'm excited because of this event honoring such a magnificent and extraordinary woman, Polly Logan. And so as you see me reaching into my pocket to sort of turn off my cell phone, I hope that lots of you will do the same. There's nothing, I know mine would be a call from Mom, wondering if I was here yet. Now we come together tonight to honor her because in some way, directly or indirectly, she touched the lives of every person in this room. As everyone is keenly aware, this gathering is a celebration. This gathering is a celebration. But it's also a way to remember and share memories of someone who is no longer with us physically, but is all over this room and beyond. Polly Logan passed away from us in September 2013. This was a huge loss for her immediate family, but it was also a major loss for her many friends and her huge circle of colleagues in Massachusetts and around the country who, like Polly, led lives devoted to public service. Now, before we begin to hear the memories of Polly that will be offered, I want to thank and recognize the featured speakers in our program. To Governor Patrick, welcome. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. I hope you noticed on your ride around here all the things coming out of the ground. It's an amazing transformation out here. And I hope you circled the campus a few times. To Governor Swift, thank you for being here. We're so grateful to you. Governor Weld, no stranger to this campus, helped us raise a tremendous amount of money. I want to extend an unbelievable thank you and welcome to both of you. Now, before we hear from this distinguished group of speakers, each of whom had an important and personal connection to Polly, I want to recognize some special individuals who are also in the audience tonight. First, I want to recognize members of Polly's family who traveled to be here with us. There's lots of you out in the room. Her son-in-law, Patrick Reed, her granddaughter, Jessica Reed Adam, and her niece, Roberta Collier. You have our deepest sympathies, but you have our deepest thanks as well. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Next, I want to recognize elected officials who've taken time out of their busy schedules to join us tonight. I know that Auditor Suzanne Bump is here. I know that, yeah, oh, you can wave, you can wave. Hey, Auditor, you can do what you want to do. You know, we'll pause a moment for you. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, great attitude. We know Robert Hedlund's on his way. Thank you so much for being here with us today. There are also so many other leaders here that have served Boston and the Commonwealth and the nation. They include former state senators, former state representatives, former lieutenant governors, former members of Congress. I want to recognize them, thank them for their service, and also ask them to stand up as a group. If you serve in public life, stand up as a group. Thank you. There are some other thank yous I'm going to leave for our person who's going to take over as the master of ceremonies in a minute. However, what a wonderful collection of friends and colleagues of Polly Logan. I'm so glad to see you here together this evening. I also want to say there are so many memories to share about Polly Logan, so many accomplishments to name, so many stories about the campaign trail. A brief biography about her life is on the back of the program tonight. So if you haven't got a feel for who we're celebrating tonight, check it out. And if there are things missing, let us know. We'll add those. Although I was not fortunate enough to have some of the intimate conversations with Polly that many of you had, when I think about her life and I listen to the stories of the people who knew her well, there are three things that really stood out for me as I thought about tonight. Polly was a woman who was ahead of her times. In word and in deed, she understood what women can accomplish and what they have to offer as leaders. She understood the barriers that women face, and she fought all of her life to open up educational, economic, and political opportunities for women. She was a role model for so many women, and especially many young women who were students in the leadership training graduate certificate program that is the signature part of our Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy. That's a mouthful. Second, she believed in bipartisan approach to political life. She made no secret of her allegiance to the Republican Party. However, she worked with Republicans, Democrats to get things done, to improve lives of all Americans. In this time when we see so much gridlock in lots of places, including Washington, D.C., her example is inspiring, and we must remember to build on it. And third and finally, she was a great believer in the importance of every vote, in the value of political activism. She inspired others to lead. She inspired others to lead lives of civic engagement, and for decades helped to strengthen the fabric of our democracy. In all these ways, Polly was a beacon of optimism. Got that beacon part in. That is University of Massachusetts, we're beacons. She was a beacon of optimism, energy, and possibly in the possibility that we can all do better together if we just agree to work together. And so let me now introduce the person who is going to be our MC for the evening, Marjorie Aarons Barron. For 20 years, Marjorie produced 5 on 5, the longest running locally produced political affairs program. To many of you, she is a well-known local television journalist, crafting and delivering eloquent editorial opinions on Channel 5 that enlighten and enliven political discourse across the state. Now, I know her as a terrific writer and a wonderful University of Massachusetts Boston supporter. And this evening, she is here as a member of the Polly Logan Fund Committee. The Polly Logan Fund Committee, a fund that is growing and growing and growing because of you. And we're so grateful for that. And most importantly, she's a personal friend of Polly's. Thank you for helping us out tonight, Marjorie. Please welcome to the podium, Marjorie Aarons Barron.
Thank you so much, Keith. My parents would be very proud. My kids would wonder whom you were talking about. You know, The Chancellor's ebullience, his dedication, his charisma, and his initiative have really advanced the University of Massachusetts Boston as a great student-centered urban public research university, an institution to be admired and emulated. So before we begin the formal proceedings, how about a great round of applause? He is a force of nature, as indeed was Polly. I first met Polly as a reporter an astonishing 40-plus years ago, but I really got to know her when my husband, Jim Barron, and I were covering the 1976 Republican presidential convention in Kansas City. Now, Massachusetts GOP was such an outlier in national Republican politics that the delegation was housed miles and miles and miles away from the convention center. So the, pardon me? That's right, it was in a different state. And they bussed us, as John, you probably remember, every day back and forth through miles and miles of fields of milo. Now, milo, we learned, is a yellow grain. We had never heard of it before we got out there, and I dare say none of us ever thought of it again, probably until this night. But Polly and I got to know each other quite a bit better on those long rides. Now, you may recall that the ticket that year was Jerry Ford and Bob Dole. What you may not remember is that for a few lively days, there was a boomlet of activity in the Massachusetts delegation to get Elliot Richardson nominated for vice president. Polly and the late beloved Middlesex County Sheriff John Buckley were at the center of that flurry of activity. It didn't get very far because Elliot Richardson was, well, let's be honest about it, he was stronger on principles than he was on personality. But the effort was fun to watch and report on. And Polly was at her strategic, energetic best, a whirlwind of activity. And with that experience, I came to know, as did every other political reporter, that Polly was the go-to person for off-the-record insider information on GOP politics. She loved to gossip about politicians. She'd share a juicy tidbit and say, "Can you believe that?" Followed always by her signature cackle, which I couldn't even begin to imitate. And she loved to bring people together, as Keith mentioned, even, or perhaps especially, if they were of different political stripes. I will say that if she knew about this turnout tonight, she would be really ticked off to miss such a great party. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Governor Deval Patrick, another charismatic figure on the Massachusetts political scene. He came to us from the south side of Chicago, and given the history of Illinois governors, I think that he's as lucky as we are that he decided to launch his gubernatorial career here. As you know, he's in the final stretch of his second term as chief executive. In so many ways, he's managed to inspire us and charm us. After all, what could top off a governor's accomplishments better than to have a Patrick sing to us at the St. Patrick's Day breakfast? Here to tell us more about his relationship to Polly, Governor Patrick.
Marjorie, thank you very much to Governor Weld, Governor Swift, Chancellor Motley, to the family and friends of Polly Logan. Thank you so much for including me today. It's wonderful to be with you. My first sighting of Polly Logan, and that's how you have to think about it, was, I think like Marjorie, more than 40 years ago. I went to school with Malcolm, and she was certainly present on campus from time to time. Polly always made her presence felt. That toothy smile, that mischievous arched eyebrow, that laugh, full-throated and genuine, the way she seemed to have grabbed a fistful of diamond brooches on her way out of the door and pinned them on her way to her next appointment. I got to know Polly well back in the 1980s when we served together on the New England committee of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She was always engaged and caring and thoughtful, a real contributor in both time and opinions. She gave copiously of both. In fact, her opinions could be sharp. She could cut you to shreds in a sentence or two if she disapproved. And I am confident that she approved of me because if you were out of her good graces, she let you know it. Polly, of course, loved politics, especially women in politics. She tried to encourage my wife, Diane, to be more politically engaged, in fact, to consider running for office. When that failed, she defaulted to me. I remember how hard she and David Place tried to talk me into joining the new Weld administration and how hard they tried to talk the new governor into having me. That political marriage never formally occurred, but when I did eventually get into politics, she was right there, coaching, advising, helping to raise money and friends. She had the kind of pride in my candidacy that my mother might have had. Of course, she knew better than I did what I was getting into. I often say to my Democratic friends that I miss the Republican Party. I miss Polly's party. That combination of progressive social policy and fiscal rigor that so characterized Polly and David and Bill Saltonstall and Elliot and Ann Richardson and the many others with whom we sometimes shared company. All of us loved Polly's fearlessness and integrity. I loved her love of country and commonwealth. I loved her love of people and her utter curiosity about the variety of them in the world. She's what I have in mind when I say I miss the Republican Party. To her family, I thank you for sharing Polly's time and with so many of the rest of us. To her party, I thank you for supporting her example of high public service and civic mindedness. To her friends, the many who are here and the many, many more who are not, who saw what a life well lived looked like, weren't we lucky? Thank you.
I was still hoping you were going to croon a little to us. Jane Swift is the only woman to serve in the role of governor in Massachusetts. Ladies and gentlemen, what's wrong with that picture? Betty Tamor is one of the leaders of the creation of the center. I'm sure you have some thoughts on that. At age 36, Jane was the youngest female governor or acting governor in American history. You were younger than that? Have I missed? And as if that weren't significant enough, 1 month into her term, she gave birth to twins. As Polly would say, can you believe that? Governor.
Thank you, Marjorie. I am thrilled to be here today. I think I deserve more credit for being the mother of twin 13-year-old girls, which is much harder. But I also want to thank Chancellor Motley, Dean Jackson, my colleagues, former colleagues, Governor Weld and Governor Patrick, Polly's family and friends for inviting me to be here. I had the honor of meeting Polly many years ago during my first bid for the Massachusetts State Senate back in 1990. I was a 25-year-old first-time candidate from the far western part of the state, and Polly immediately took me under her wing. Now, I'd like to think that's because she saw lots of promise. She knew where I was headed, and so she began making introductions to political leaders. She started holding fundraisers for me, really invested in my career. Unfortunately, the real story, as some of you have mentioned to me today, is the reason that Polly helped me is because I, like her, was a Kappa. That's a sorority. We were both Kappas in college. I never realized when I pledged a sorority that it would have such a positive impact on my career, but it absolutely closed the deal with Polly. I had an uphill battle during that campaign against a very well-established opponent, and to be truthful, finding allies was not an easy task. But Polly, as she was wont to do, dove right in, got on the horn with her vast contact list. I'm sure she was using a Rolodex back then. And as many know, and I'm sure Betty Tamor remembers, even in 1990, fundraising was really seen as a man's game. It was somehow seen as a little bit unbecoming, to borrow a phrase, for women to ask for money. Polly would have none of that. She was fearless, she was forceful, and unfailingly polite. And she was a wonderful fundraiser for women candidates and for me. Her enormous efforts made a huge difference in my first race, and I did have the distinction then of being the first woman, or the youngest woman, elected to the Massachusetts Senate. And she was with me with every single one of my races, those I won and that one that I lost. She did the same for countless other candidates in state and local races across the Commonwealth and across the country, many of whom you've seen their pictures here tonight. And I think, as Governor Patrick said, the respect for Polly within all corners of the Big Tent was really immense and unparalleled. Even social conservatives, whose policies were light years away from Polly's, would jump to meet with her. She was modest, she was honest, she treated people with respect at all times, and she had the energy and the stamina of campaign aides a quarter of her age. When discussing challenges like securing the support of a particularly cantankerous Republican delegate, Polly would wave off the difficulty. She'd say, "I'll just invite them to tea." Polly's genteel teas were more effective than many a power lunch at Number 9 Park or martinis at Maison Robert. That was part of her magic. In a business not lacking for big egos or loud talkers, Polly effectively and always delivered on everything she promised. She did it with a warm smile on her face, and truth be told, she did also have a loud voice. Another thing we shared in common. Polly's been called the grande dame of the Massachusetts GOP. I think that actually understates her role a little bit. Certainly, Bill Weld and Paul Cellucci were the heart of the party during the Republican Renaissance and Revolution in the 90s. But for 50 years, Polly was our soul, she was our conscience, she was our motor. The fiscally conservative, socially moderate playbook of the 1990s was as much a reflection of Polly as anyone on that ticket. She was a proud Republican, but never a partisan. She had friends on both sides of the aisle and was a force for moderation, tolerance, and bipartisanship. As we've heard already, she had a hand in supporting a young man who would later bring the Democrats back to the corner office after a 20-year absence. I'm sure that made Polly proud, even though her side lost. Now, I know you're not a Republican governor, but I am beginning to wonder if you were a Kappa. I want to applaud Ann Bookman and the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, it is a mouthful, for crystallizing Polly's enormous legacy to the Commonwealth through the Polly Logan Fund, which we all know will advance her passion for promoting women in office and also, hopefully, be a force for enhancing a more civil tone in politics. Both are desperately needed. Thank you.
I think tonight we must all be Kappas, don't you? Speaking of all of this bipartisanship, Bill Weld worked with Hillary Clinton on the House Judiciary Committee looking into the impeachment of Richard Nixon. He chased Whitey and he worked with Brother Billy. He was a Republican elected governor when the GOP had just 14% of the electorate in Massachusetts, and he won re-election with 71% of the vote, and even, if I'm not mistaken, carried Boston. Is that correct? We also like to remember him for a rather significant dive into the Charles River and for the prowess he regularly demonstrated on the squash court. He has written 3 novels. Governor, I read Mackerel by Moonlight, and I think you did better at politics.
Marge, I tried to keep that day job in politics, but sometimes these things don't work out. I got to say, unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I'm overcome by one thought, and it relates to one of the prior speakers. And the thought is that Keith Motley is a hard act to follow. So I'm thrilled and touched to be here. Polly was with me every step of the way in my public career, virtually from day one. The beginning of my public career was one spring day in 1978. My wife and I got on the plane from Boston down to Washington. We were going to go grouse hunting in Virginia. So I was dressed in torn off jeans and parked my shotgun with the captain up front, which is what you did in those days. Only one question, is it loaded? So as we rounded the corner, and we had 2 seats, 1B and the other one was way in the back. So I was going to give Susu 1B, obviously. And I saw the occupant of 1A was a person whom I knew. It was Edward W. Brooke. So I did what any gentleman would have done. I pushed my wife to the back of the plane, sat down, and the senator was trying to hide behind a newspaper, desperately seeking an hour and a half sleep, I'm sure. So I leaned over, put my hand inside of his newspaper and said, "Senator, my name's Bill Weld. I'm a law partner of Gail Mahoney. Who are we running for AG this year?" Well, that kind of woke him up. And that was a 90-minute conversation. And the next person I met was Polly Logan. And it was kind of a tear. And that election was the one in which Ed King knocked off Mike Dukakis in the primary, in the Democratic primary. And Paul Tsongas kind of upset Senator Brooke in the final. And I made Massachusetts political history by losing 80-20 to Frank Bellotti. I've got the record in the other direction for governor, but for any statewide constitutional office, that 80-20 record stands to this day and will probably never be topped. But so after that, and I had a wonderful time. I went out and said, we need statewide investigative grand juries. I mean, I really liked the politics part of it. I enjoyed every minute of the campaign. And so I went to the first little conclave of Republicans after it. And the people who came up to me were evenly divided between those who could not restrain themselves from saying, "Oh, you poor little thing," and those who looked at me as a burn victim and turned quickly away. That was not Polly. She kind of saw it my way. So she bounded up to me and said, "What fun, what fun." And I thought back to being in the war room of the Brooke campaign in '78, and that was a tight, tough election. I remember being there one night at midnight. Everybody was absolutely exhausted. There was this long row of tables, not in ranks, but one long row, and I couldn't figure out why they were in one long row. And we were stuffing envelopes, which is what you did in those days. The room was kind of quiet. Half the people were done like this, and suddenly this human tornado enters the room, and not at ground level either. Polly, in bare feet, hops up under the first table and steams down the length of every single table in the room. "That pile's not ready. This has to be done. What are you doing?" And it was just simple. Her energy was inexhaustible. At the convention in '78, Ed Brooke had a challenge from the right. He didn't really appreciate it, and he got up and gave kind of a feisty speech, at the end of which he said, "And I'll have a roll call on that. Thank you very much." I thought, oh my goodness, he's gone too far. He's been rude. And there was a lot of grumbling, and obviously not everyone in the hall was happy. And Polly said, "Boy, if only we could get him to do that more often. Wouldn't that be great?" So I thought maybe I've got a little bit to learn about politics, and indeed I had quite a lot to learn about politics, about not snuffing the life and the emotion out of it. Who knew that 3 years later I would be U.S. Attorney, Frank Bellotti would be Attorney General. That would be a lifelong friendship, and a few years after that I would be quitting the Justice Department and running for governor up here. And I remember what an atrocious candidate I was, because I'd spent 7 years in justice and I wouldn't say anything outside the four corners of the indictment because I didn't want the chief judge to punch my ticket. That doesn't really make very good politics if you're that wound up that tight. And it was Polly, first and foremost, among several people who kind of got me out of my shell for that race eventually. And I'm very, very grateful to her because the view is much better from out here with all these people than it is from inside a shell. So she and David Place, mentioned earlier, really were the making of my political personality in those years of '89 and '90. If I could just close by borrowing a line from Keith Motley, which is, I hope that everyone before they leave here will reach in their pocket, but this time not for their cell phone, but to draw out their checkbook and write a check. University of Massachusetts, Boston, Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, Polly Logan Fund. Thank you.
Boy, it's nice to see you back in Massachusetts. Strange interlude in New York and all. Dean Ira Jackson of the McCormack School of UMass has had a truly distinguished career. Revenue Commission, and I'm not going to name the whole thing because he has a CV like this, but highlights. Revenue Commissioner of the Commonwealth, Dean of the Kennedy School Center for Business and Government, Dean of Claremont University's Drucker Graduate School of Management, Vice President of External Affairs at Bank Boston, and as I say, that's really just naming a few. However, I'm sure that with all of his accomplishments, what he is really best known for, at least in our household, is that he hired me away from Channel 5 and brought me to Bank Boston. Little did either one of us know that within a year we'd both be gone because Fleet had acquired Bank Boston, which then became Bank of America. But that's a story for another day. I'm really honored to be able to introduce him.
If you were intimidated, Governor, following Keith Motley, you can imagine how I feel following the three of you. I don't think anyone other than Polly Logan could have ever assembled this many Republicans at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. So we expect that we're going to do very well in the fun tonight, that's for sure. I unlike most of you, I didn't know Polly well, but she treated me the same way she treated everyone in her life. As a close friend, she used to call me Buddy. And I remember that when I was working for Kevin White, she had, of course, endorsed Frank Sargent, but nevertheless, she entertained Kevin and his entire family at the Logan estate for a day. She was just so full of love and life and a love of politics. I don't know anybody in either party who captured all that enthusiasm and caring and just complete love of people and process and politics, her Cohasset, her Commonwealth, her country. It was a privilege to know her. I was going to observe, not to put a downer on the evening, but I think Polly would like this. We're in a room, if you'll just take a look at the back of the room, there's a magnificent portrait of a young woman named Crystal Campbell, the kind of woman who Polly sought to inspire. And that face inspires, that smile inspires us. She was one of the three victims of the Boston Marathon bombing and a graduate of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and the Chancellor has dedicated this room in her name and memory. And I think Polly would be smiling on us to see not just her protege, the governor, but Deval being outranked by two Republican governors in this room. I think John W. McCormack, if you'll forgive just a little bit of a diversion, of which I'm dean of the John W. McCormack Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies here at UMass Boston, and we house the Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, where the Polly Logan Fund resides. McCormack grew up 2 miles from here in Andrews Square into extreme poverty. In fact, his mom lost 4 of her children to tuberculosis, which was then called the Irish Plague. McCormack quit school in the 8th grade to help support his mom and the other 4 surviving children. He went on to become the last lawyer in Massachusetts to be admitted to the bar without a high school diploma. And then, never forgetting where he came from in the 41-year career that he enjoyed in the Congress, he sponsored Social Security for FDR and was Speaker of the House and muscled through for LBJ, the Civil Rights Act, Medicare, and Medicaid. So he never forgot where he came from, and I think he too is smiling down on us tonight, knowing that his legacy is being embraced and shared with Polly Logan. Just a couple of acknowledgments. Please, the planning committee for this event, Marjorie Aarons-Barron, Peggy Dre, Nancy Dwight, Elaine Richardson, Maureen Rooney, Martha Bernard Welsh. Would you please stand and be acknowledged for your leadership? Back in 1968, a young woman who had written a terrific book called Running Against the Wind, Betty Tamor, started a program for women in government, which was the first program of its kind in the United States of America. She did that at Simmons College and then at Boston College, and then she migrated it under Sherry Penny's leadership out here to UMass Boston. But I want to acknowledge Betty Tamor, the founder of the Project for Women in Government. "20 years ago, when Sherry and women faculty here at UMass Boston were able to migrate the program here to the University of Massachusetts, Boston, Elizabeth Sherman was the first director, and then Carol Hardy-Fanta became the second director, and I also want to acknowledge them for their leadership. Please stand. On a night like this, I'm not going to rehearse the many contributions that the Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy have enjoyed, except to say that we have now 750 women who are graduates of our certificate program. It's a very strong alumni association. And we're blessed to have a very talented new director of the center, Professor and Director Ann Bookman. I was lucky enough to persuade to join us from Brandeis and MIT and the Women's Bureau in the Department of Labor. And we're thrilled that you're running the Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy. Dr. Ann Bookman.
Thank you, Ira. I'd like to add my own welcome to Polly's family and express my deepest sympathies. I also want to welcome her many friends and colleagues who are gathered here and our very distinguished speakers. The three of you honor us with your presence. And your personal stories are extremely moving. I personally did not know Polly, but I feel, having listened to the three of you, that I know her a lot better, and the inspiring character of her leadership shone through your comments, so thank you. I also want to recognize members of the Polly Logan Event Planning Committee who lead a double life because they're also members of the Polly Logan Fund Committee. And they worked so hard and so lovingly on this gathering. And I won't ask you to stand again, but I just want you to know how much I appreciated all the work that you did. My favorite part of our planning meetings was Polly stories, as you can imagine. I mean, we would be putting together guest lists and trying to figure out who to call and who should call who, and there'd be this fabulous Polly story that would just emerge over coffee. And it was so much fun. And I think the friendships that each of you shared with Polly are further evidence of the impact of her mentorship and her capacity to move people to action. So, as you've heard, I'm no Keith Motley, but I am the new director of the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, and I'm extremely honored and privileged to hold this position. This year has been one of listening and learning and planning. Shortly after I started in September, Polly passed away. I soon heard about the fund that had been created in her honor in 2000 and began to learn about the amazing woman who inspired this fund. The Polly Logan Fund, an endowment in support of the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, has three major purposes, and I just want to share these with you. First of all, it provides scholarships to women enrolled in our graduate certificate program. This program trains women to be dynamic and effective leaders in the public sector and the nonprofit sector. As committed as these women are, many struggle with the decision to enroll due to the significant costs involved. More than 3/4 of the women who are in this program work either full-time or part-time to support their families. And an equally large number, actually a larger number, need financial aid to come here. Later this spring, we will select several Polly Logan Fellows from the incoming class, and these scholarships will make an enormous difference in helping these women to come to and complete the program. So I want to tell you a little bit about who these women are. First of all, they're a very diverse group in terms of age, race and ethnicity, professional experience. But most important, they are passionate about the issues affecting women's lives. Just to give you a little sense of what they're interested in, what they're working on, current students are advocating and learning about issues of domestic violence, housing and homelessness, fair taxation policy, the growing economic inequality in our society, and many other critical issues of our day. They hold internships at the State House. I think we have 7 or maybe 8 there right now. They work in advocacy organizations like the Jane Doe organization and in government agencies like the Department of Public Health. What I want to stress to you is that these are women who are determined to provide leadership around critical social issues, and they will be trained to do so in a program that combines academic rigor and real-world experience. The second area that the Polly Logan Fund supports is our center's research. The center has been known for its studies on a range of public policy issues and on women's political representation. We track women's representation at all levels of government in New England, local, state, and document the particular barriers that women of color face seeking elective office and the important perspectives that they bring to the table. With support from the Polly Logan Fund, we will be able to take our policy-relevant research as well as our research advancing the political leadership of women to the next level. Third, the fund supports policy conferences, public debates, and research forums designed to advance women's political leadership and the public policies that support America's working families. The fund allows us to convene stakeholders from both political parties, including policymakers, business leaders, union members, journalists, grassroots activists, anybody that Polly would put under her big tent. For example, this coming fall, the center is partnering with the Kennedy Presidential Library and the women's commissions of 6 New England states to hold a New England Women's Policy Conference called the Unfinished Agenda. This conference will be held. We're very excited about this, and you'll hear more about it. Look for an email. This conference will be held at the Kennedy Library and will bring together women leaders from across our region to discuss the theme, economic security for all women. They will share best practices, state legislation to ensure policy changes like pay equity and paid sick days, and the Polly Logan Fund will help to make this conference a reality, and I think probably what would be most important to Polly, a springboard for action. The center is now deeply involved in a strategic planning process to help us enhance the impact of the center, not only to advance women's political leadership and economic empowerment, but also to build, and I think this is something that Polly taught us, to build a more just, inclusive, and truly democratic society for all. To do this, one of the themes that we're developing at the center is the theme of building bridges. We are building bridges of empowerment to link the resources of this great public university, the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and the needs of inner city Boston residents who are struggling for a better life for their families and communities. We are building bridges of bipartisanship so that people of different political parties can collaborate and find workable solutions to key public policy issues. And again, in Polly's spirit, we are building bridges of mentorship to pass knowledge and skills from experienced women leaders to the girls and the young women who are becoming the leaders of tomorrow. I think these are all bridges that Polly Logan began constructing during her lifetime as she worked tirelessly mentoring leaders of both parties, championing the cause of women's advancement, and fighting for social justice for all. With your support of the Polly Logan Fund, we can continue to keep Polly's legacy alive and build new bridges that I think would make her proud. And I'm not shy about asking for money. I want to tell you that we are thrilled with the response to this event. The Polly Logan Fund, for those of you who don't know, as an endowment, has a core fund of over $250,000. And just with this event alone, we have raised over $30,000 because of your generosity. So before I close, I just want to express a special appreciation. I don't know where she is. Ann Foreman, where are you? Ann is a member of the center staff. I want to acknowledge her leadership and hard work in making this event possible. Thank you so much, Ann. She is also our alumni coordinator for our graduate certificate program and does fabulous work on that too. And I also want to acknowledge the rest of the center staff and of the dean's office staff who have worked together to make this event possible. So in closing, I want to thank you all so much for coming. We are thrilled with this turnout. I don't think that I've gotten to be able to circulate and meet all of you, but please, if I haven't shaken your hand or had a chance to say hello, please come up to me before you leave. I would love to meet you. I want to thank all of you who have supported the fund in the past. There are many people who have donated to this fund who weren't able to be here tonight. And I want to thank those of you who are now helping to grow the Polly Logan Fund of the future. And with your support, I think we can double the endowment. Thank you so much.
Two brief observations. With our governors here who have done so much to support biotech and life sciences, if only we could distill the bipartisan spirit, get one of those companies to do it, ship it down as serum to Washington. It would make a much healthier body politic. Remember, as we leave here, Polly was all about empowering women and engaging them in the political process and civic life in the community. Those are the values we are reinforcing, all of us, by being here tonight. And for that, I thank you, and I thank you for donating to the Polly Logan Fund. Enjoy the rest of the evening.